This is a fascinating story because the Republicans obviously have talked a lot about gutting Dodd-Frank. Turns out they're going to have to decide who they want to offend here.
That's right. This is an issue that really gets to the heart of why the credit card industry can be so lucrative. Banks and payment companies like Visa and MasterCard charge retailers a fee every time a consumer uses a credit or a debit card. It's a small percentage, but it adds up to billions of dollars a year in revenue for the financial firms. Retailers don't like this fee. They think it's unfair, and they have been fighting for years here on Capitol Hill, as well as in the courts, to change it. They scored a big victory in 2010 when there was a provision added to the Dodd-Frank Act that capped the debit card fee specifically. Now, here on the Hill, as lawmakers in the House are debating a broader overhaul of Dodd-Frank, banks are lobbying very aggressively to repeal and get rid of the Durbin Amendment, as it's called, the cap that it had on debit fees. On the other side, you've got retailers who are lobbying very hard to keep the law as it is. Stuck in the middle are lawmakers on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, who don't want to offend either one of these important constituencies and political donors.
So clearly this is something that is going to be very contentious, and both sides are making their arguments very vigorously to Congress. What are their specific arguments? What are banks' arguments? What are retailers' arguments?
Sure. So retailers think that the credit card industry in general, how they set these fees, is not fair. And they want to keep, they say that this is the law and that it should be kept as it is. Banks argue that the Durbin Amendment cap on debit card fees hasn't done what it said it was going to do, which is reduce prices for consumers. They also argue that banks have seen less revenue. They've had to make a lot of changes to their own debit card industry, business as a result of this. And so what's interesting about this is that the data is conflicting. On both sides, there is data that shows sort of in terms of what the impact to consumers is, whether or not limiting these fees translates to lower cost for consumers at the register. But what is very clear is that this pot of money, so to speak, will either be going to the banking industry or the retail industry. And it's the first step is that lawmakers have to choose is which one is that.
Who is the biggest beneficiary or loser? Which companies have the most at stake here, Elizabeth? I know you mentioned a few in your article.
Sure. So this really affects on the banking side. It's the biggest companies, the biggest banks, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, all the way down. This is something that actually unites the banking industry here on Capitol Hill. Credit unions, small banks, community banks, they would like to see this change. On the retailing side, the same goes that this is across the spectrum. What's at stake for retailers like Walmart and Target and Home Depot. It affects small businesses, restaurants, really any business across the country that accepts a debit card.
So what's the next step? How does this move forward if both sides are vigorously far apart on these issues?
Sure. So we've yet to see the introduction of the Financial Choice Act, which is Jeb Hensarling's package of legislation that seeks to overhaul the Dodd-Frank Act. The updated version is expected to come this year. It has been delayed in that we haven't seen its reintroduction. From there, it sort of, aside from the fact of whether the prospects specifically around the swipe fee issue are in the Senate or in becoming law, it's a very likely chance that lawmakers in the House are going to have to vote on this issue of swipe fees, depending on how this moves forward in the House. Any sort of, whether or not you include it in the Financial Choice Act or not, any vote or any sort of public stance that lawmakers have to make is of consequence in this sort of broader decade-long fight over these interchange fees, as well as, specifically when it comes down to the debit card swipe fees.